It was an ordinary Saturday afternoon, the kind of day where the sun hung lazily in the sky, and a warm breeze brushed the streets of Columbus, Ohio. At the intersection of Broad Street and Lincoln Avenue stood a small, family-owned convenience store, an establishment that had been a fixture in the neighborhood for decades. Inside, the shelves were neatly stocked, everything from canned beans to candy bars. A faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee lingered in the air, the kind that made you feel at home. Among the handful of shoppers was Mrs. Evelyn Carter, a petite woman in her late 70s with a gentle smile and a quiet demeanor. Her presence wasn't noticed because of her size, no, it was the warmth she carried with her, a presence that seemed to soften the edges of the busy store. She was dressed in a floral print dress, simple yet elegant, and her small handbag rested lightly on her wrist. Evelyn moved methodically through the aisles, carefully checking prices, selecting items with a practiced hand. Life had never been lavish for her, but she found joy in the small, everyday moments. Today, her shopping list was simple: a loaf of bread, a carton of eggs, and her favorite brand of tea. She hummed a quiet tune to herself, blissfully unaware of the danger quietly creeping up behind her. At the far end of the aisle, a man watched her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his faded hoodie and scuffed sneakers marking him as an outsider. His eyes, sharp and predatory, scanned the store, never lingering too long on any one product. He wasn't there to shop, not even close. His eyes were fixed on Evelyn and the small handbag she carried, dangling from her wrist like an invitation. But Evelyn wasn't entirely alone. Outside the store, parked in front of the curb, sat her son Derek in his old, reliable pickup truck. Derek, 45, had inherited his mother's fierce loyalty, though he wore it more openly. Over the years, he had seen the hard work Evelyn had put into raising him and his siblings, and now, as an adult, it was his turn to protect her. He had just finished an errand and decided to join his mother as she shopped. From his truck, Derek kept a close eye on her through the glass storefront, a fond smile tugging at his lips. But then, something caught his attention, a figure lingering too close to Evelyn. His smile faded, a sense of unease creeping into his chest. He studied the man, who was moving with a strange sort of purpose, and a knot of tension tightened in Derek's gut. The man was too close. Derek's instincts kicked in, sharpening like a blade. He leaned forward, narrowing his eyes, watching carefully. He couldn't act just yet. His timing had to be precise. He opened the truck door, his heartbeat quickening. Inside the store, Evelyn was oblivious, her hands shaking slightly as she reached for a box of tea. The arthritis in her joints made even the simplest tasks a struggle, but she managed, as always. The man was closing the distance. He moved closer under the guise of inspecting the shelves. Derek's chest tightened. Something wasn't right. It was too quiet, too still. As his mother turned to grab the next item on her list, Derek stepped out of the truck, his boots hitting the pavement with purpose. The small bell above the store door chimed as he entered, but it wasn't enough to startle the thief. He continued following Evelyn, his hands deep in his pockets, every step radiating threat. Derek's eyes never left him. He could feel the weight of the situation. He couldn't afford to hesitate. Evelyn was moving slowly now, her focus on the task at hand, still unaware of the looming danger. Meanwhile, the man was gaining ground. Then, it happened. The man lunged forward, his hand snatching for Evelyn's purse. It was a swift move, but not quick enough. The strap of the bag pulled tight around her wrist, jerking her backward. Evelyn's sharp gasp filled the air, loud enough to draw Derek's attention from the door. His blood boiled. In an instant, Derek was moving, charging toward them, his voice booming. "Hey! What the hell do you think you're doing?" The thief froze, just for a second, enough to glance back and see Derek coming at him like a freight train. His presence was enough to send the other shoppers stepping back. But the man wasn't done yet. With a violent tug, he tried again, pulling on the bag, his strength against her frail body. Evelyn staggered but held on, her knuckles turning white, her voice trembling but resolute. "Let go of my purse!" Derek didn't wait another second. His hand shot out, grabbing the thief's arm like it was a vice. "I said, let go," he growled, his voice low, a threat laced in every word. The thief looked at him, his eyes flicking from Evelyn to Derek. He was big. Strong. But Derek wasn't intimidated. Years of working construction had honed his strength, his presence. He stood firm. But the thief wasn't backing down. With a sneer, he squared his shoulders, his eyes narrowing. "Mind your business," he spat. "This ain't got nothing to do with you." Derek's jaw clenched. "That's my mother," he said, his voice cold. "And you just made it my business." Even as Derek held the man in place, the air crackled with tension. The thief wrenched his arm, trying to free himself from Derek's grip, but Derek wasn't about to let go. They stood, locked in a battle of wills, the store around them frozen in silence. Evelyn stumbled back, clutching her purse to her chest, her breath coming in short, shaky gasps. "Are you okay, Mom?" Derek asked, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. He didn't take his eyes off the thief. "I'm fine, baby," Evelyn managed, her voice trembling but still strong. Just be careful." The store had gone eerily silent. Mateo, the young cashier, stood frozen behind the counter, his wide eyes darting between the two men. A couple of other shoppers stood near the back, phones raised, unsure whether to call for help or record the drama unfolding before them. The thief, now visibly agitated, squared up to Derek. His size was imposing, but Derek didn't flinch. He stood his ground, broad-shouldered and unyielding. "You don't want to do this," Derek warned, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Walk out now, and this ends here." But the man wasn't listening. With a growl, he lunged at Derek, trying to shove him aside. The thief's sudden lunge was unexpected, catching everyone off guard. But Derek, his instincts sharp as ever, sidestepped the attack with ease. He used the thief's own momentum against him, sending the man stumbling forward, crashing into a display of potato chips. The bags tumbled to the floor, creating a chaotic mess of plastic and salt. As the thief struggled to regain his footing, his face contorted in rage. Derek wasn't about to give him the chance to recover. With a quick step forward, he positioned himself squarely between the man and his mother. "You're not touching her," he said, his voice cold, every word dripping with steel. The thief didn't hesitate. He charged again, his fists swinging wildly, desperate to land a blow. Derek ducked, his reflexes lightning quick, and countered with a sharp punch to the man's gut. The blow landed with a sickening thud, knocking the wind out of the thief and causing him to double over, gasping for air. "You don't mess with family," Derek muttered, his words cutting through the silence like a blade. But the thief wasn't finished yet. Despite his clear disadvantage, he lunged once more, this time grabbing a nearby bottle from the shelf and swinging it toward Derek's head. Evelyn let out a horrified scream, her eyes wide with terror. Mateo, the cashier, dove behind the counter, as if hoping the chaos would somehow miss him. Derek's forearm collided with the bottle, blocking the swing just in time. Pain shot up his arm, but he didn't falter. With a swift twist, he disarmed the thief, sending the bottle skidding across the floor. And then, in one fluid motion, he sent a final punch crashing into the thief's face, sending him sprawling to the ground. The man groaned, his body slumping against the cold tiles. For a moment, the store was frozen in time. No one moved. The only sound was Evelyn's shaky breaths and the distant hum of the store's air conditioning. Derek stood over the thief, his chest heaving with adrenaline, his fists still clenched, ready for anything. "You done?" Derek asked, his voice low, cold, unforgiving. The thief didn't respond, but the fight in his eyes had died. He nodded weakly, too winded and battered to argue. Even as the immediate danger passed, the weight of what had just transpired hung in the air, a heavy silence that no one seemed able to escape. The thief lay crumpled on the floor, his breaths ragged, the store's usual calm shattered by the chaos. Derek's clenched fists slowly relaxed as the adrenaline faded, but his guard remained high. He turned to Evelyn, his expression softening. "You okay, Mom?" he asked again, his voice quieter now, the intensity fading as concern took over. Evelyn nodded, her hand still gripping her handbag tightly, as if it were a lifeline. "I'm fine," she said, her voice steadier now. "Thank God you were here." Derek placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's over now," he said, though his eyes flicked back to the man still sprawled on the floor, his body a broken heap of defeat. Mateo, the cashier, finally found his courage. His fingers trembled as he reached for the phone behind the counter and dialed 911. "The police are on their way," he said, his voice shaky but clear enough for everyone to hear. The other shoppers, still huddled near the back of the store, murmured amongst themselves. One woman, a stranger in her 30s, stepped forward cautiously, phone in hand. I got everything on video, she said. This guy doesn't get to walk away from this. Derek gave her a brief nod of appreciation but said nothing, his focus still on Evelyn, who had finally lowered her handbag. She was beginning to regain her composure, though her eyes still reflected the ordeal they had just survived. Evelyn glanced at her son, her gaze filled with a mixture of gratitude and pride. You didn't have to do all that, she said softly, the weight of the moment still lingering between them. But I'm glad you did. Derek chuckled lightly, trying to ease the tension. You raised me better than to just stand around, didn't you? He said, though his voice was thick with emotion. The thief groaned from the floor, pushing himself up weakly. Derek immediately moved closer, his posture rigid, ready for whatever the man might try next. Don't, Derek warned sharply, his tone biting. The man froze, understanding all too well that any further defiance would not end well for him. Minutes later, the wail of sirens cut through the stillness outside, and 2 police officers entered the store. They quickly took in the scene, the disheveled thief, the scattered bags of chips, and the visibly shaken Evelyn. One officer, a seasoned-looking man, approached Derek. What happened here? He asked, pulling out a small notepad. Derek explained everything, his voice calm, pointing to the security cameras mounted on the walls and the bystander who had filmed the entire encounter. The officer nodded, taking notes, while his partner cuffed the thief, who offered no resistance as he was hauled to his feet. As the thief was led outside, he shot one last look at Derek. This time, it wasn't anger or defiance in his eyes, it was defeat. Derek met his gaze with quiet resolve, silently ensuring the man knew that he had picked the wrong person to mess with. The officer turned back to Evelyn, his expression softening. Ma'am, are you okay? Do you need medical assistance? Evelyn shook her head. I'm fine, thank you. Just a little shaken up. The officer nodded, then looked at Derek. You did a good thing here. But we'll need your statement at the station. Derek nodded, understanding that it was part of the process. Of course, he said, though before he left, he turned back to his mother. You want me to call someone to stay with you? Evelyn smiled, reaching up to pat his cheek. You've done more than enough, son. Go take care of what you need to. I'll be fine. But even as the police drove off, Derek couldn't shake the lingering weight of what had just happened. It was more than a confrontation, it was a reminder of how quickly the world could test your courage. Later that evening, Derek and Evelyn sat in her small but cozy living room. The tension from earlier had faded, replaced by quiet reflection. The television hummed softly in the background, but neither of them paid it any attention. Evelyn held a warm cup of tea in her hands, though she hadn't yet taken a sip. She glanced at her son, breaking the silence. You know, she began, her voice gentle, I wasn't scared. Not really. Not with you there. Derek looked at her, his expression softening. I'm glad I was, Mom. But you shouldn't have had to go through that at all. Evelyn nodded, her gaze drifting to the window where the streetlights cast long shadows across the floor. Life is a way of testing us, she said, her voice quiet but thoughtful. Sometimes it's in ways we don't expect. Derek leaned back on the couch, letting out a slow breath. Yeah, but today reminded me of something you taught me, he said, his voice steady. To stand up for what's right, no matter how hard it gets. I guess that lesson stuck more than I realized. A small smile spread across Evelyn's face. It's not just about standing up for what's right, Derek. It's about standing up for each other. Family. Friends. Even strangers, when you can help. That's how we make the world better. Derek nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. The events of the day had left him shaken, but they had also reinforced something he'd always known. The strength of his family wasn't just in their bond, it was in their values. As the night wore on, they sat together, the warmth of their connection filling the room. Derek eventually stood, stretching his legs. I'll head out, Mom. But if you need anything at all, you call me, okay? Evelyn reached up, squeezing his hand. I will, baby. And thank you for everything. As Derek walked to his truck, he glanced back at the house where he'd grown up. The day had been intense, but it had also been a reminder of why he fought so hard for her, for his family, for the life she'd worked tirelessly to give him. Life would keep throwing challenges their way, that much he knew. But as long as they had each other, they would always find a way through. This story wasn't just about protecting what was yours. It was about the love and courage that define family. When we stand together, we remind the world that strength comes in many forms.